All right. Hello, LinkedIn. We are live. It is 12:15, and I think we're just going to jump right into it. Hi, I'm Eugene Yanza, founder of Origin Art Academy, and we have a guest today, Diane Pascual, and she's going to be talking about intro to sketching for storytelling. I'll just let you kind of give yourself a little bit of a bio, Dan, and we'll jump into the demo.
Hey everyone, I'm Diane. So I am teaching an intro to sketching for storytelling today. And my background, I'm currently by day, I'm a UX designer, and by night, I'm an illustrator. So I have worked on projects anywhere between children's book illustrations. I've worked and contracted at Hasbro Studios as a product illustrator. I've worked on animated commercials with Skechers, lots of random in between projects, but I've also kind of worked within multiple industries. I've been also a web designer since like 2008, web and UX. So I've been kind of in that tech space. I've worked with different kinds of agencies over the years. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, let me know.
Yeah, well, welcome. Thanks for showing up today and showing us this demo. I think some people are coming in, and if anyone is in, feel free to go in and say hello, say where you're from. But otherwise, we will go ahead and get started.
Awesome. You want me to just share my screen or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, go ahead. Yeah, I'll give you the presentation controls.
Okay.
Or if you like, I could show the. Oh, there it is.
There we go.
Amazing.
Oh, all right. So today we're going to work out of this Fig Jam board that I made. So yeah, we try to do like a little dry run yesterday with Gene in Photoshop, but Photoshop was just not cooperating with us. So Fig Jam is a really cool software to do some of these workshops. So I'm just going to go over some of the basics of sketching. And if you're using sketching for storytelling, there's a couple of things that you can learn that'll kind of help you visualize some of your ideas. And so one of them is thumbnails. So thumbnail sketches, they're exactly that. They're small, little tiny sketches. They're quick, and they don't always have to be finished drawings. They could be visual notes. Like if you have an idea that you need to get down on paper, it's good to have a little bit of like sketching knowledge and skills to kind of help you visualize that quick idea that you got. And so don't think of them as finished drawings. Visual notes, you can write, notes that you have about, some of the ideas, write keywords. That's what I do. And this is really a low pressure method to help you come up with more ideas quickly. And so I know people get intimidated when it comes to sketching or even drawing. I get really messy. I don't really care. I don't judge my drawings. It's more of like I use sketching as a thinking tool, and I've been able to kind of use that skill set in so many different industries. Like now I'm in product and UX design. So I use a lot of that sketching skills to come up with quick ideas to show like stakeholders or people in my teams. So yeah, so they're not meant to be pretty. And so what we're doing today at the end, after I kind of explain some of the basics of sketching, we're going to draw some stick figures, big shapes only, aiming for readability. Thumbnails are really good for brainstorming ideas and not performance. So don't think that you have to finish these drawings. They're throwaway drawings. So yeah, so like even here, like in some of these older sketches that I have that I was planning for a project, you can see here it's so bare minimum. So it's like, here's a figure, here's the character, here's another character, what's their reaction. And so I don't even know, runs, I guess, panning left to right. The character disappears in the crowd. So the other character is scanning the crowds of people. And so he finds her, she's glowing, whatever. This was a story I worked on a couple of years ago. And then I guess she runs those lines. So yeah, I mean, they could be so loose, so sketchy. You can add notes here. Like I said, this is a good way to kind of just get your juices flowing and not think too hard about something, because once you get these ideas down on paper, you don't even know if they're going to work. So it's like, you can't judge yourself that
Mhm.
hard, you know?
Can I ask you a question, Dan,
Yeah,
before
go
you
for
go?
it.
So for beginners, what's like the mindset shift that someone has to make when they start sketching with the storytelling in mind?
Honestly, just have fun with it. Don't be too perfect, because perfectionism kind of kills creativity. So if you go into the mindset of just, hey, I want to have fun, I want to develop some ideas, I want to explore little tiny sketches to kind of visualize some of the things I'm thinking about, this is a good way to do that. So
Love that. Love that answer.
yeah,
Great.
thank you. Okay, so I'll just keep going. These are just, little tiny sketches. They're quite literally like this small. And, could be like a 1 inch by 2 inch. I like to make squares to kind of contain that like in a frame. So you can think of it that way. And these are good for, I know we're kind of more gearing towards animation in games. But if you're in the corporate world and you're working with clients or stakeholders and you're trying to get your ideas across, this is a good way to kind of like come up with little frames and just thumbnail sketch some of the ideas you have. Might be for a video campaign, or it could be how a user interacts on a screen. So that could be a good way to do it. Or like if you're creating presentation slides and you want to have specific content, like kind of in like a timeline to show people and to kind of like, do a little bit of storytelling. So that can help too.
I love these. When I was in film school back in 2006, I remember drawing sketches like this to kind of convey the story for my cinematographer. That was
Yeah.
many, many years ago, but my sketches were horrible back then, before art school. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, art school does give you a little bit of that structure to go in there and kind of figure out, like, what are you going to draw? What's the purpose of this drawing? What kind of story am I trying to tell? What's the environment going to look like? How do you visualize all those things? And then on top of that, putting the character in that space. And so we'll talk about that in the next few boards here.
great, great.
Yeah. So the cool thing about Fig Jam is that you could just use your trackpad, if you have one, to pinch your fingers together. And this is kind of how you would zoom in and zoom out. So the next thing I want to talk about is horizon line. And it's easier than you think. You can kind of show perspective this way. So basically, horizon line is the viewer's eye level. It's that invisible line that tells us where we are in relation to the scene. So if you look here, this figure that's kind of in the foreground, that's going to be closest to us. And so it's always going to be darker in the foreground. So that's a larger character. So the horizon line is kind of up here. So it's higher. So when you have a higher horizon line, things that are closer to the horizon line are going to be smaller. So these little figures right here are a little bit smaller. And then right here in the kind of like in the midground are these, other figures. And then, looking up, here's another low horizon line. So the horizon line is right here. We have a foreground object that's maybe like a bush or a plant or something. And then we can see this figure right here is a little bit smaller. So when you're thinking about composing some of these scenes, think about some of these rules. Well, kind of like rules. Once you know the rules, you can break them. And so you also want to think about what is the emotional perspective of the story. You know, you change the horizon line, you change the story. So higher horizon line, the character's looking down. Lower, the character is probably most certainly looking up. So those are just some of the basics. And I've included some of my old paintings here from years ago, just to give you an idea. And so here we have like a higher horizon line, meaning you're going to see on top of buildings and things like that. I spent a summer study abroad in Italy a couple of years ago, and we painted all over Florence. So it was a fun time, but it taught me a lot about light and shadow and framing your composition. So those are like some of the valuable lessons I took away from that study abroad program. So even in this one right here, the horizon line, this is the highest contrast right here where the light is kind of like hitting, like coming from this left side, you know, hitting like the floor and on the side of that building right there. And this was an actual photo I took when we were going through some of the towns, and then I just painted it. And I thought, wow, the lighting was so good. And you can see like in the foreground down here and to the right of the building, it's a little bit darker, more desaturated values. So that's a good way to kind of like frame your composition, you know, pair it with the lightest area to the darkest value. And so you can see that sharp contrast even here on the next painting that I did. So the horizon line is most definitely down here. And it's kind of like being framed by, you know, the darkest parts of the building. And so it's lighter down here. So it kind of like draws your eye down there.
I love these. I love these paintings. These are in Florence, you said?
Yeah, in Florence. Thank
Wonderful.
you. And then this one was kind of more of like my final project. This was like, man, 15 years ago. Knowing these things now, I probably would do a little bit better. But I was like a total beginner when I was doing these. But you can see here the horizon line is kind of right here. So everything you see here in the foreground is darker. And then even the inside of the umbrella is a little bit darker. But then you see this lighter part right here kind of leading down here. And we have one figure in the light. And then this is kind of like the strongest contrast right here. And then one figure that's kind of dark to kind of see that like contrast and value. So those are some of the things, like the basics just to look for as you're doing these. And then the next thing, this kind of goes with the horizon line, is the rule of thirds. And they teach this in film schools, animation schools, gaming schools as well. So this is pretty much not a new concept, but I'm bringing it here as one of those storytelling techniques. So the rule of thirds means that you divide the, the scene into thirds, and these little points of interest could be like a focal point where you add the subject. So it serves kind of like as a focus tool. You place the subject on, somewhere near a third, and it makes it feel more cinematic. It tells the viewer where to look. So I sketched this really quick last night, but you can tell like this cactus kind of, is in line with the third here. And so it kind of frames the scene a little bit, and it's darker because it's in the foreground and it's closer to us, right? And the middle ground right here is kind of, laying on the bottom of the third. And then this is kind of like in the background, it kind of fades. And, the further you are, in perspective, the lighter it's going to be. Like this sun I just indicated there as a light source. So the further away and closer you are to the sun, it's going to be lighter. So foreground, darker elements, midground, middle values, background, lighter. So we can see that here too. I found this online. So we have this dark foreground object, which is a cactus. It's probably like the size of it is really large. And then so it kind of leads your eye here to this area here where it's still like kind of like middle values. And then the lightest part of this image is kind of around here, but then it like leads your eye and you kind of go here as well. So a part of this cactus is in the dark, and then part of it is kind of like, lit up by the sun. So, and other examples here, so you can see that the rule of thirds still is applied to this random stock image, and I love that. And this is actually probably in the middle to kind of give it that focus point, but you can see how some of these mountains or rocks in the background are kind of like, fading away as they get closer to the horizon line. And then here's a scene from Baby Driver, great movie. There's a lot of really cool cinematics, scenes in there. And so you can tell here, like the focus point here is the red car, right? So it is sitting on one of the points of interest. And this is kind of right here. And you can see how it's kind of lit up. It's like this bright red. And, the other cars in the foreground, like here on this side, this would be considered like the middle ground. And this would be considered the foreground on the right. So it's really interesting how when you look at some of these, if you observe some of your favorite movies or look at some of these really cool scenes, you'll see that they apply these, these concepts, the rule of thirds and all of that.
Yeah, I love the rule of thirds. In my photography, I start off with rule of thirds a lot, and then I'll modify it to kind of fit the story I'm trying to tell.
Yeah, I think a lot of photographers do use that rule of thirds concept. So it's pretty cool.
It works.
Any questions so far on this? Anybody else?
No, I didn't see any questions from the audience, but I might ask you another question before we move on to the characters.
Yeah.
One question is, how do you decide what elements in your scene that you're sketching is essential to the story you're trying to tell?
Yeah, that's a good question. So elements, certain elements. Is there an emotion that I'm trying to convey with this? And you think about, the story from middle or from beginning, middle, and end. And you think about some of the story points or the story beats that kind of tell the story. So you want to imagine and kind of have like a visualize some of those scenes. And so some of the story elements I think about are, like I shared here, light and shadow. Where are they? What environment are they in? And the character. What is the emotion of the character? Is the character scared or are they happy? What kind of emotion are they going through? So those are just some of the basics I think about. And
wonderful.
Yeah, hopefully that answered your question.
Oh yeah, that's great. That's great. I think those are like the main elements, and so it's just a good reminder.
Yeah,
Definitely.
and if y'all are interested, we're exploring all of these concepts and going deeper in the live 6-week course that we're doing in a couple weeks. So yeah, I'm excited for that course. So if you sign up, you'll get to work with me. Yeah.
Exactly.
So characters in a scene. So now that we have kind of an idea of, all right, we know where the horizon line is going to be. We know the rule of thirds, what about the characters in a scene? How do we put them there, And so, we want to think about, a couple of emotions. There's definitely more than this, but I added just like the basics. So joy and excitement, they have open postures, they have arms up or out, lifted chest. They're kind of in like a bouncy state. Fear, anxiety, they have hunched shoulders. Arms are kind of like pulled in like this, wide eyes, leaning back, kind of frozen. Anger, determination, forward lean, tight fists, squared shoulders, like strong stance. So those are some of the things that you want to think about as you're putting your character in the story, right? And so I included a lot of like my old work in here just to kind of give you reference. This is from like an old thesis project from grad school, but basically I put my character here. She's looking up, she's like open, you know, and she's got this like kind of like excitement. And then you can tell like the lightest part is right here. So she would be considered like kind of mid-ground, and it kind of mixes a little bit. It's kind of like a skewed perspective in a sense because you have the tree kind of coming up and you're looking up. So the horizon line is lower, and so it's kind of like a lower angle. And then this one is the character is like scared or afraid, and you can kind of see that, you know, her face is kind of in the light. So like when I did my thesis project, I was playing with light and shadow and, you know, trying to use that as storytelling elements in the frame. And so here's another one, you know, the darkest contrasts, you know, are the figures. Who are these figures? Just makes you like think like, who are they? And then I put the light kind of coming in for that like stark contrast. And then, you know, to iterate, like thumbnail sketching is the best because then you can kind of like work out your idea. And then when I actually put it inside of Photoshop to paint, this was what I got. And so I ended up putting the character in the middle to kind of give it that more of an impact. So those are some of the elements.
I love that you showed both, like showing the initial sketch here and then this final product, because it kind of shows that, you know, journey from start to finish, and it's kind of good to see that for the audience here who's watching.
Yeah, thumbnail sketching is one of those things that you can do that's low pressure for yourself, and it's like I like doing it, and I've done it over the years with, you know, clients and projects just to kind of help other people on the team visualize some of those ideas. You know, it's funny because like people will get that sense of idea once they see like the little sketches, and you can kind of get on the same page and you can kind of like align on some of those ideas, right? Like you'll sketch something, but then someone on your team is like, wait, I had this other idea. Can you add this to it? And then now you're like talking like, okay, like we get each other, you know? So
it's a great communication tool just to quickly get something on paper, and you don't have to invest a lot of time.
Exactly. It's a really good communication tool.
Love that. Love that.
Yeah. And so here's another one. So this I kind of learned during my time when I was in interior design school before I found myself like in the animation field or anything like that. My first interest was interior design, and I didn't know we had to sketch people inside of environments. And so this is one thing that I learned from them going to that school was 6 heads. So, you know, you can make these circles, and this is how high the character or the figure should be. And you can start off with like, let me just zoom in here. So you can start off with a circle, and then you've got like, you know, a triangle for like, you know, the neck and the shoulder. If you're doing it super fast, just remember these like very basic shapes. And then for the body, you can have like a square and then 2 smaller squares. And then you could just draw the lines for the legs. It's so basic, but once you apply that idea and then you start sketching out different figures here, like different shapes, think of the figure as different shapes, you know, and like this one's facing forward, this one's facing backwards. So, and this is kind of a cool trick that I've learned too. So you've got your vanishing points on each end, and then you draw that horizon line in the middle to kind of, you know, place them in that space, right? So, so this figure here is obviously in the foreground. So the closer these figures get to the horizon line and the vanishing point, then they start, you know, decreasing in size. So those are some of the basics that you can kind of practice on your own too. Draw this entire thing and try putting your characters in the space and figure out like how big are they going to be based on the horizon line. So
Yeah, and I love just the simplicity of the shapes. You know, circles, triangles, squares. Um, they're great
yeah,
because you don't
I
have to be
honestly, it
a
didn't take
pro.
me more than 5 minutes to draw this entire
That's great. That's great.
this
Like
entire
it,
like
it's
for you guys to like kind of get the concept and the idea.
it conveys a
That's
lot of information regardless.
mm-hmm. And
Okay.
so, if you guys are listening and want to participate, the next part of this would be warm up sketches. And we can do something where we can create a couple of frames for environments. We can play with the horizon line. We can play with the environment and the character and putting them in that space. So what we could do right now, here's the warm-up sketches. We're going to draw these very basic shapes, lines, squiggles, objects, in the 3D space. And what we can do is we can set the timer for 3 minutes. Whoops. We can do a timer for 3 minutes and then I'll have some ambient music playing if that's cool. So
Yeah, this is great.
I'll go ahead and set the timer.
Not sure if the music's going through, but that's okay.
Can you hear it?
Probably not, but that's all right.
Oh, okay. All right. So you want to just kind of warm up your hand to eye coordination, just draw some circles, straight lines. There's like a lag on my tablet here. So,
It's okay.
so
Me, maybe you could turn off
which one?
your video temporarily while you
Oh,
draw.
yeah. Let me turn it off.
Yeah,
Hopefully that will
that
help.
might. Or maybe you also turn off the music. Maybe that might be
Oh,
killing some resources. There we go. Perfect. That
oh,
might help.
that helped it.
All right. Wonderful. Yeah, I know you're used to using your Photoshop,
I
and
know
but
yeah,
when
it's
you're
not easy.
streaming here, it takes up some of your resources, so it's fine.
It does. It really does. Let me turn off my video real quick. There we go.
Great.
Okay, that kind of helped. It's my first time drawing on FigJam.
Yeah, there might be a little bit of a delay, but that's okay. Just
Yeah.
the intention here is just to warm up anyway.
Yeah, and I might not be able to do this live, but this is kind of the idea, just doing squiggly lines. I think this is best on paper because
hmm
you kind of get that tactical feel with like a pencil or a pen instead of like drawing it on screen. Like even now, I still prefer paper.
So do
And
I. So do I.
yeah, I'm getting better on Procreate since I got this magnetic screen, but um, yeah, paper and pencil is still better.
Well, since we can't really do the sketch in Figma, I might ask you more questions.
Yeah.
For the audience who's still around. One question I had, and I know you worked on your Dreamwalker comic,
Mm-hmm.
and it has a very distinct mood and like narrative voice. Can you share a little bit about how you came up with that story?
Yeah, good question. Dreamwalker. Am I showing up on the video now? No.
Not yet.
Okay, let's see. There we
There
go.
you go.
So how I came up with Dreamwalker. Wow. So I was reading a lot of books. I think at the time, I was a web designer for a biotech company in San Diego. And the day-to-day like work that we were doing was so dry that I felt like I wanted to escape into something after hours. So I would read a ton of like fantasy books. I was like really interested in dreams and spirituality. And so Dreamwalker is kind of like about this girl who has these abilities. She can go into the dream world. So, so the way I came up with the story was I was reading a lot of like manga books at the time, and I'd grown up reading like comic books and stuff like that, but I never thought I could create a comic book. You know, I never like really had that confidence in myself. And I think it was through like just reading blogs online, reading a lot of books and being like, wait, maybe I can do this, you know? So it was like a combination of like also going to Japan 2 years before that. I had gone to Japan, visited some family for 2 weeks, and it was kind of like a exploratory, like creative trip for me where I visited a lot of bookstores, bought a lot of books, read a lot of manga there, and just like that, you know, the Japanese culture is just so ingrained and like, you know, very character driven. I heard they like even use that in their marketing now. So yeah, so it's very popular in Japan, like, you know, all the manga books and stuff like that. And so when I came back, I was kind of inspired from that trip too, and just reading books about dreams. And so I was just inspired by a lot of things. So if you ever find that book on Amazon, like my style has definitely changed. That was the first time I ever experimented with like actually drawing and learning how to create my own style. So I think for the most part, my style has evolved over time, but that's definitely like a book that I created when I was like 28 or something like that. So many
Love
years.
that.
Yeah.
Love that. And then how did your sketching help with developing the final comic?
Yeah. So I think I was just not afraid to sketch because I had spent years before that in an interior design program for 2 years. And then I switched out of that program and went into graphic design. And even in the graphic design program that I was in was they implemented a lot of thumbnail sketching because we had to come up with ideas for layouts for magazines and books and ads and that kind of thing. And you want to like come up with thumbnails, concept, you know, sketches and thumbnails so that you don't waste time on an idea that might not, you know, like if you were in the advertising field or industry, then you would not spend a bunch of money on something that, you know, didn't work or grab people's attention, right? So you want to come up with these like very low pressure sketches. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, love that. I remember when we met, you were starting your Dreamwalker
Yeah.
comic book, and then you were telling me about the story. I was like, oh yeah, you got to finish that. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Let's see. I don't think we have any comments from the audience, but we can wrap up since we are at time. Maybe there's one more question before we go. Let's see here. Oh yeah, how do you recommend artists use reference or observations to build their narratives?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually will sketch some ideas first, and then I'll think like, okay, I need some help visualizing this, like, you know, in the real world. How is it going to look in the real world? What's the style? So there's a couple of things that I do. Like I put together a mood board That's one thing that I do. So I put together a mood board and I look at mood, tone, color. I look at environments. I look at style. Those are some of the things that I put together, and I have it open in front of me. So if I have an idea for a specific thing that I'm trying to visualize, then I have those references to kind of help me. If it's even like a figure like posing in a certain way, then I have that reference to kind of draw from. Or sometimes I'll like, some of the colors in an image, and I'll color sample something, and it doesn't even have to be images, for storytelling. They could just be like, a really nice color scheme that you find somewhere. So I do a lot of that. I utilize like references in that way for character references. Like I'll get posing, or you could, another thing you can do is if you can't find that pose for the character that you want to sketch in your mind, just get up in front of a mirror and snap a photo of yourself.
Pose yourself. Yep.
And just, sketch
easiest way.
Posing, and it's not going to be you, it's going to be your character or whatever. So that's kind of how I did a lot of those things for Dreamwalker. I was like experimenting, I was learning how to do things, and that was one of the fastest ways that helped me complete that project, was using myself as a reference and getting up and snapping like poses of how the character would pose, and even like perspective too. I was so bad at perspective when I first started learning. So
I love it. The fact that you still accomplished a comic book is still a big deal, So congrats to you on finishing Dreamwalker.
Thank you.
If anyone wants to buy it, it's on Amazon.
Yeah. I'm actually working on a new comic book, and I'll be at Ontario Comic Con in May. So I haven't posted anything about the current book I'm working on, but it's a personal project, something that I've been thinking about the last couple of years. So
great. I'm looking forward to getting it. Awesome. That's a good goal to have. Before we wrap up, I think Andrew said, "This is great, Dan. Thank you. I enjoyed this workshop and hearing about your background."
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. And just for those who are still interested, the course starts in a couple of weeks or maybe in a month or so. We're trying to get a number of people to enroll in the course before we start. So if you do want, we do have a coupon code. I forgot which one that was now. Oh, it was Sketch 20. There you go.
Sketch 20 for
20%.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything else you want to say before we go?
Thanks to everyone who watched this workshop. Hopefully you learned something. And yeah, if you want to work with me one-on-one, I'd love to help you with whatever skills you're building or a project you're working on. This could be applied to, personal projects as well as like in the workplace environment. So yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks everyone for attending, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.